All right. So I'm sure people will trickle in a little bit more, but this is a public postmortem for unresponsiveness with Supermarket, the chef community site, where we conduct these postmortems internally. So for Supermarket, since it is the community site, we are going to go ahead and publish, do it in the public because, yeah. And so, yeah, let me share my document here. Cool. Hopefully everybody can see that. Let me switch over here. Please mention me in, for those that are viewing, please mention me in Pound Chef on IRC if you have any questions as I go through this. So first off, we start every postmortem stating the following. This is a blameless postmortem. We will not focus on the past events as they pertain to could've, should've. All follow-up action items will be assigned to a team or an individual before the end of the meeting. If the item is not going to be top priority leaving the meeting, don't make it a follow-up item. I was the instant leader, Christopher Weber. So approximately 2 hours after the launch of Supermarket, making it the official community site, we saw intermittent unresponsiveness and high latency. This affected both the Supermarket and the Bookshelf API server, which is hosted by the Supermarket. So, well, first we start with the timeline. All times are in UTC. At 1915, community.opscode.com and cookbooks.opscode.com were updated to point at Supermarket. At 1918, api.bookshelf.com was pointed at Supermarket. And at 1940, all of our tests had completed, and we declared the deploy complete. At 2126, in Pound Chef, Icarus reports that https supermarket.getchef.com/cookbook/ant is white paging. Also reports getting a 502. Seth at 2127, Seth Chisamore reports in the incident room, which we were in, dealing with some Bookshelf v2 problems, that the Bookshelf API is returning errors. So for the purposes of this discussion, anytime Bookshelf is used, it's used to refer to Bookshelf v3. At 2135, we moved communications from our incident room to Sokoko, which is our internal video and audio chat, for a bit more real-time conversation. Sadly, one of the interesting disadvantages to this is you don't get as good of a log of what was going on. So around 2136, discussions around the worker for the community site sync causing a fair amount of traffic because it was connecting to itself. So I guess that isn't super clear in this timeline, but essentially we talked about the fact that there was a background process that kicked off every 3 hours that would sync the old site to the new site. Well, since the old site pointed at the new site, the background worker was connecting to itself. I kicked off a CCR to pull in code that removed that background sync. At 2138, Jay Timmerman notes that all 3 servers are out of the ELB, so at this point we have effectively a full outage. At 2142, Sean Horn updates status.opscode.com, which for those that didn't view the last postmortem is now status.getchef.com. Or for those that like the Twitters, it's at opscode_status. At 2149, Ian Garrison notes that the health check is on port 443 and not 80. This is intentional. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up so people can keep following along. At 2149, this is confirmed as normal by C. Weber and Jay Timmerman. At 2150, the decision is made and Jay Timmerman begins spinning up 2 additional instances. M3 mediums. So for those that aren't aware, it's worth pointing out that this infrastructure is hosted in US West 2 and obviously on Amazon. So at 21:59, Paul Mooring suggested backing off the timeout to 15 seconds temporarily. At 2200, Adam makes note that we need to change the status to reflect that this is the second issue. So essentially shifting from the Berkshelf v2 outage to the supermarket being unresponsive. From there, at 2212, the status was confirmed as updated. At 2214, we started to see latency decrease. At 2220, I made note of a decreased number of Postgres connections. Around 2225, discussion in ops, which is internal HipChat, this was in Sokoko, around the fact that Unicorn was configured with 3 workers and M3 mediums only have 1 core. At 2236, we discussed in the ops Sokoko room bumping the size of the instances. The decision was to proceed with 2 parallel options. 1, start spinning 2 additional instances at the size of M3 extra large, and then at the same time also start cycling 1 at a time and resizing each instance to M3 extra large for the ones that already existed. At 2250, Jamie Windsor pings C. Weber on IRC to discuss a possible rollback. At 2252, we came to the consensus that that if things hadn't improved by 2315, we would start to evaluate the need for that. At 2255, running with 5 instances, we seem to have alleviated the pressure on the backends. But I want to say latency was still pretty bad. I don't have a link to that. At 2256, Mark Harrison works to get Seth Vargo access to the backend to verify we are not seeing issues related to the app itself. At 2300, all nodes in the pool are now M3 extra larges, and I think at that point we had 5 instances, which is the current state. At 2306, the incident was resolved. At 2327, Jay Timmerman deployed a change to increment the number of Unicorn workers. At 2339, Jay Timmerman determines that change didn't work. At 2358, Jay Timmerman deploys a change that actually corrects the number of Unicorn workers. And just as a note, I opened a link a bit later. Give me a second, and I will actually open this up because my apologies for anyone that is offended by profanity. But a link I shared, or was going to share, apparently that's not working. Let me try this again here. Apparently it's interpreting my link. All right, so let me actually share this just because it's kind of fun, and I think a lot of us appreciate seeing graphs because it communicates well. So these are the sum of number of 200s to the back end. As a note, this number has actually increased. It's hovering right around a little closer to 40,000 now. But as you can see, let me verify that that's. We can see where launch happened. We can see the outage, and then sometime around 2300, when everything came online, we started to see some big spikes. And as we added more unicorns, we were able to take even more requests. Okay. Any questions as I'm going through this so far?
I have a point of clarification.
Okay.
So the current state is that we have 4 supermarket app instances in rotation in the ELB. So we have 5 total that are running, but only 4 of them are in the ELB rotation.
Okay. Is the plan to keep 5 running, or is it the plan to keep 4 running, or have we kind of figured
Uh,
that out yet?
still working on that.
Okay.
I'm seeing 500s from Nginx. It doesn't seem to be affecting at the ELB level, but uh, there are HTTP requests in Nginx that are getting 500s, which it's related to a possibility that the number of workers versus the number of cores for unicorns, that might be a red herring, and we may be able to have more unicorn workers.
Okay. Let me fire back up the.
So I'll investigate that as we're looking at this.
Okay. Well, I think that gets into longer term discussions around.
Yeah, that's going to be a corrective action discussion.
Yeah. All right. And hey, it looks shiny again. All right.
Oh,
So
and we're at about 35 to 40,000 some requests.
okay. Now is that and what I'm realizing is the graph the graph that I was showing earlier is 200s, and I think the
Hmm.
request number is even a little higher because we get into
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
404s and stuff. Okay, so the root cause at this point was determined that I can't spell, number one. um, that a mismatch between the number of unicorn workers and number of cores caused traffic to back up, and the nodes were not sized to meet the demand. Um, can you tell I was
So,
hungry while
huh.
writing this?
So the first bullet item, I don't know that that's necessarily part of the root cause. I think that not having a correctly tuned number of unicorn workers uh, could be an issue, but I think the bigger issue is that we were running on systems that had a single CPU, and uh, the application appears to be CPU bound as far as resource contention goes. We were also getting uh, timeouts that were happening with the ELB taking application nodes out of rotation because the default health check for the ELB is very aggressive. You have to have 10 successful health checks in a row, um, and I think by default it was 5 seconds, and we were spending more time than 5 seconds on some requests. I think Paul looked at those numbers a little more carefully than I did at the time.
Yeah, I kind of want to reiterate what Joshua was just saying. Like, for me, I think the core root cause is really the fact that we had such an aggressively low timeout set on the health check. So as soon as you remove one node, the latency is obviously going to spike on the others because you have left to handle the same traffic, and then you remove another one and another one until they're all down. And that's kind of like an endless cycle. And I think that everything else on there is true for the root cause, but for me, like that seemed like the main factor in bringing us hard down rather than just a partial outage.
Okay. Is there a name for that? Like, is that considered a thundering herd problem, or is that just
It's not really a thundering herd problem because it's a consistent load. I mean, the problem is like you're artificially forcing the traffic up on the web nodes that still remain by taking one out.
okay? I guess app nodes were being taken out of ELB too quickly and increasing load.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it's really
Were there recommendations delivered for how to configure this in a production environment? Were those deliverables with the software?
Um,
They were not. Like there wasn't
I
specific tuning that was recommended from from the application folks.
yeah, I think that that is part of a root cause then, because without knowing what it's supposed to be configured to, then the operations folks are just kind of guessing, and then they like, you're like, oh shit, I guess I should add more stuff. That kind of sucks.
yeah, and I think so. That'll get into some. One of the things. Well, I guess it would be here. Yeah. I think one of the interesting things that that at least I failed to do as part of prepping for this launch is the pulling back the amount of pulling back logs from api.berkshelf.com's Heroku instance to get a feel for how much traffic it was actually taking.
Yeah, I actually have no idea. All I know is I stood that up like a year ago, and the only time it ever went down is when Heroku was like, "I'm going to turn this instance off now."
Hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, I don't know how you'd want to phrase that in there, but I think you're right. Like the kind of the core there is like when we planned for load, we did that before we added the Berkshelf API into there, and then we didn't reconsider how much load we were likely to have from the time we decided to add that in for launch.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because I hadn't thought about that because when we talked about sizing, we did it before before the universe endpoint. So and the other thing that I wonder is this may not have been this may be caused by the way we implemented the universe endpoint. So in the old community site, the downloads that were returned. Actually, that's not true. Never mind. So yeah, that's probably where that's very possibly where that might have been. So definitely something to look at.
So the big difference, really, just to clarify, is that we have a small bit of caching on the API Berkshelf on the old community site in between there. It's not a large amount, but if you get 10,000 requests for a minute and you have 1 minute of caching, you put a whole lot less load on the Ruby app, which we don't have as far as I'm aware in Supermarket, which really throws off the amount of load we saw on the old site versus what's going through the Supermarket.
Mm-hmm. Also, anything that was anyone that was running an Berkshelf API server that was caching old API, they were connecting and downloading a cookbook from it, and then continually doing that. And that's how the scrape worked. And recently, today, Seth Vargo made a change so that way, if you were to try to run that cache builder, which you don't need to anymore, but you can, it won't cause nearly as many hits to the API.
And that's something added to the code but not yet released then, Jamie?
No, I didn't release it yet, but we can.
But just to clarify, even if we release that, people would have to upgrade their servers to get that change.
Right.
/universe on Supermarket. So that's a corrective action that's already been basically taken where the code needs to be released, but the work has been done. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about stabilization steps, what it took to do. So we killed the background job that syncs the old site. We resized the 3 existing instances to M3 extra larges, and we added 2 additional nodes at M3 extra large. So we now have a total of 5 nodes. The total impact for this, based on the graphs that I've looked at, is approximately 2 hours when you look at when latency spiked. And that probably should have been added more detail there, but effectively it made the Berkshelf API unusable. And both API unusable during that time. Okay, so corrective actions. We've already talked about this one. The Berkshelf API server will use the /universe endpoint. And to anyone out there that's listening, that please, once that code gets pushed out, update your API servers so that you can save us all the cost of bandwidth, because currently the API server downloads all the things. And B, because it's less pain on the community site. Continuing on, what other kinds of corrective actions should we have taken, or I'm sorry, can we take?
So we can evaluate the number of unicorns that are going to be required to run the application, so that the service can meet the demand.
I would have probably load tested the application and identified where the constraints were. I think that's really important to deliver to the operators. I don't know if it's really on you to figure out how to tweak the application the best way possible. Our team, the Brookshelf team, should have delivered the current traffic, what to expect that would then be coming onto that application as well. So that could be figured into the capacity planning.
We should also, Chris and I talked about this earlier, Berkshelf and the Berkshelf API should send a user agent header or some type of X header that identifies the request as coming from Berkshelf for analytics reasons and knowing like what's going on. Which the API server does that now, and I can do that in Berkshelf pretty easily. I think we might already do it.
We already do it in Berkshelf.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and I think this kind of falls under the capacity planning thing. I don't think there's a specific corrective action around capacity planning. I mean, at this point, it's up and it's stable. It's just a matter of making sure that as the application grows, we're adding more nodes as necessary. Hopefully, as the API server, the Berkshelf API servers get upgraded out in the field, we'll see traffic decrease. But that's yet to be seen.
I mean, is there anything that we can do on the app side? Like, it seems like requesting a cookbook download shouldn't have taken that long, since the app just rewrites the download URL to an S3 URL, and at that point, like, it's S3's problem. So is there some type of, this is maybe just an investigative action, not really an action, but like investigate caching in Redis, or even just a hash that's like, this download path actually goes to this S3 bucket. And for things like metrics, I believe right now we are blocking while we increment the download counter, whereas perhaps we should take a more statsd-like approach where we fire an event off and let the counter increment later. Like the more important thing is that the user gets their cookbook downloaded. If we miss a download count or two, like, that's far less important than making sure that the service is reliable and we're not killing ourselves trying to make sure our download numbers are 100% accurate.
Okay, am I accurately capturing what you just said there, Seth?
Yeah, I would say is non-blocking instead of isn't blocking, but yeah. I don't like contractions.
Like that?
Yes.
Awesome.
Can we do it in Comic Sans? Get an email there.
You don't see me laughing over here.
For those that are just listening, the most entertaining part of that comment was when Jamie's coworker turned around and made a really funny face, and Jamie didn't even see it.
There's all a bunch of coworkers over here also, over that way, which did the same.
Let me jump in real fast to IRC. Did I lose everybody, or is it just quiet? Okay, no, I didn't. There's heads moving. Okay, I don't see anything in IRC pointed at me. Are there other? Oh, I know another corrective action, and this is something that came out of the last postmortem. Updates to status.getchef.com will propagate pound chef. And so I guess the question is, and I don't know that we have the ability to do this, but it might be interesting. From the Berkshelf perspective, does it make sense to notify the Berkshelf room if supermarket is having issues? Like if we tag something as being a Berkshelf thing to notify Berkshelf, or is it a pretty well-known thing that if you're seeing Berkshelf issues, go jump in Pound Chef because that's where you're going to get help right away?
I'd prefer if we put all the issues in there. That way we don't need to cluster up 2 chat rooms.
Sounds good to me. All right. Any other corrective actions, concerns, things we missed in the timeline?
Do we need any corrective actions surrounding monitoring?
That's a good question. And it's hard to say because we were all like watching as this happened.
There's some discussion in HipChat right now about when servers get dropped out of ELB that we're not currently getting notified. It would be nice to add that in.
Mm-hmm.
That would be good. So let me.
Yeah, that'd be a CloudWatch alarm.
Yeah. And I think we've already got it from a previous postmortem, but we also have monitoring the backend servers directly.
Okay.
Yep.
But I think that's already an action item from a previous postmortem, so we don't necessarily need it now.
Okay. So let's. Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense and is something we should look at. Anything else that we missed? Things that we should do going forward? All right. Well, sounds like we are good to go. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hopefully these are useful, and we'll continue to, when it makes sense, to dealing with things like supermarket, host public postmortems on what happened. So look for. I didn't mention it in this postmortem, so I'll mention it again. I will be on a plane tomorrow, so please expect the actual written up blog post and postmortem on Thursday with the follow-up from this and a link to this video for those that are watching live and may want to watch it again. And I think that will do it. Thank you very much, and have a great night, guys. Or all, rather.
See ya.